Ecco, vedi, funziona. Prova 1, 2, 3, prova. 1, 2, 3.
Magari ci risponde, sarebbe
hello, good morning or good evening. Can you hear us?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Ok, nel momento
modo
Dipende
qui.
dal momento in cui bisogna leggere le
Eh,
domande.
Possiamo fare una Hello.
No question. Anna. Sister travel. I'm they travel.
He's planning today. He wants to travel.
Okay, have they registered him?
Just now that my husband calling, they give him that one. So he was thinking that maybe it's nobody. So I said, busy. Father said you should go and do everything. And let the boy be busy. So he's calling me back. I said I should be bringing him for him. I want to be taking it.
And nobody did it. Anybody did it.
For sister.
So please.
No, I didn't see your
Mama came for checkup. I didn't tell you. Mama came for checkup. So he has carried him. So what will happen is that I hope I don't know them.
Oh,
Oh, yeah, good, yeah.
All right, you can go.
Okay, sister. Thank you. Is here. If I go down,
Okay.
Los sociólogos de la palabra. Y era otra. O sea, recurres un poco a esa revisión de la historia y sacas luces nuevas. Sí. ¿Y tú, Rafa? Sí, estaba pensando que pasa esto que dice Luis también.
tsena tsa ma-Franciscan di-notes o ska di download, o ska di printa out, o shebe ntho tse ke di rometseng ka moraonyana.
Let's say that fear is actually going through because we threaten that negative positioning on
Someone is talking, but I'm not here.
Has the meeting begun really? Me, I'm not hearing anybody. What time are we beginning?
It's starting at 11 Roman time.
Thank you.
No, no, you don't go into the, you don't have to go into the. Oh, yeah. Oh.
Good morning.
Tracy's like that. She doesn't do it's not for us.
Lilian, I have a big meeting today, you know. Zoom at 4 o'clock. Yeah, now that's what I put on now. So what about the pathogen? Make it late. And that one was in Not taking. This new clean. I don't see that. Okay. I take them. Then.
Hello, morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
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 Hello, this is Julia Young. I believe that I'm supposed to speak on the program, but I wasn't sure if someone at the training course was supposed to introduce me.
Okay, yes. Good morning. Good morning to everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. And welcome to this formation on free to choose whether to migrate or to stay, pastoral care with migrants and refugees. First point of order, please, you're invited to turn off your microphones. So please turn off your microphones. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So we will begin this moment of formation with the introduction. There will be two introduction, one by Sister Mary John, who is Associate Executive Secretary of the UISG, and then also an introduction by Father Aldo Spoda, Director of the Scalabrini International Migration Institute. Okay, so I'll give the floor already to Sister Mary.
Dear friends, a very warm welcome from Rome to all of you. It is my privilege to welcome you all to this significant event. I'm so happy to see so many eager faces online there. At the very beginning of this significant gathering, let us remember our brothers and sisters who have lost their lives in the earthquake in Morocco recently and in the flood devastation in Libya. Let us hold in our hearts the grieving families and the immense suffering people are undergoing at this moment. As we begin this 4-day training course, I wish to acknowledge and appreciate the commendable services of the Dicastery for Integral Human Development and the Scalabrini International Migration Institute for responding with courage and compassion to this urgent need that presents itself to us for attention and action. Both these institutes have been at the forefront of extending pastoral and practical care to the migrants, refugees, victims of human trafficking, seafarers, and their families. In the Old Testament, we read very rich and moving stories of a people living in tents, constantly on the move, and being led daily by the God of the sojourner. This pilgrim nature of the Christian journey is beautifully captured in the synodal imagery of the tent illustrated in the continental documents. And yet all of us know well that the deepest longing of people is always for a stable place which they can call home and where they can be free and fearless. Unfortunately, it is a far dream for many people. The title of this course, Free Whether to Stay or to Migrate, poses some questions in me. How free are they really to stay or to leave? Pope Francis, in his message for Migrants Day for September 24th, when you will finish this course, says, I quote, the decision to migrate should always be free. Yet, in many cases, even in our day, it is not. Conflicts, natural disasters, or more simply, the impossibility of living a dignified and prosperous life in one's native land is forcing millions of people to leave. On a daily basis, we see people fleeing or people driven out. The Instrumentum Laboris for the Synod, in its worksheet on communion that various states, quote, migratory movements are a sign of our time, and migrants are a paradigm able to shed light on our times. Their presence constitutes a particular call to the Catholic faithful to walk together. Dear friends, our commitment to a cause gets translated into concrete action only when we allocate time, money, and personnel for it. And that is what we are witnessing by this large number of participants. The mission of the International Union of Superiors General is to facilitate that process by which women religious can serve the church through the diverse charisms and gifts of their congregations. The OISD committed to support the cause of the migrants with concrete steps by allocating resources and personnel. A team led by Sister Carmen Bandeyo, Sister Mary Ann, and Sister Therese is carrying forward OISD Migrants Project. And OISD is very happy to pledge its ongoing collaboration with the dicastery and with CIMI. Over the next 4 days, dear friends, you will listen to eminent speakers who can both instruct and inspire on the topic of pastoral care with migrants. The word pastoral is very important. It echoes the synodal thrust of a church that is caring and concerned. This is a training course intended to equip you with adequate preparation for the task ahead by providing you with information, updates, sharing of experiences, and skills. Keep alive your interest in this ministry and make the optimal use of the opportunity before you. I wish you a very fruitful days ahead, and also many greetings from Sister Pat, who is right now in Peru. We send you her greetings. You will be doing a lot of listening these days, so I will not keep you long, except to say how happy I am to see you and how warmly welcome you all are. Thank you. You are most welcome.
Thank you, and dear participants, thank you for your presence on these days of dialogue and training around such a topical and important issue as migration. The phenomenon of migration is characterized by extreme complexity, but at the same time, great sensitivity. The foreigner in our closed societies often brings out fear that turns into indifference or intolerance. The challenge the church has is to bring out the opportunities that the encounter with the other brings and to make the intercultural dimension the way to live the Catholicity of the church.
Okay, if you do, can you spray it for me?
I don't want it too much.
Please close
And
the
this
microphone.
episode, just what do you know? Please tell me. Just tell me what you know.
I just know when it's a
In this way, our communities are called to live the dimension of fraternity and
Okay,
solidarity.
Sepi, you have the prayer in that book. Eh? Can you be looking at your book and say it for me?
Is you have to turn off your microphones. Turn off your microphones. The only people who have to turn on their microphones are the speakers when it is their turn. The rest, you have to turn off your microphones. Thank you.
The challenge the church has is to bring out the opportunities that the encounter with the other brings, and to make the intercultural dimension the way to live the Catholicity of the church. In this way, our communities are called to live the dimension of fraternity and solidarity as the evangelical way, and to discover in the other, even if different from me in terms of origin, language, culture, and even religion, a brother and a sister. Faced with the great and current migration phenomenon, theology has tried to reflect, bearing in mind two premises that are the substratum of any intervention of the church expert in humanity in favor of people on the move. First, the centrality and priority of human dignity in the migratory experience, effectively expressed through the promotion of human rights. Secondly, the awareness that migrants and their families require special attention precisely because of their situation in the host country, as they face social, cultural, relational, economical, and sometimes even religious barriers and difficulties. In many societies, migrants and refugees often do not enjoy the favor of public opinion. They do not always have the attention of institutions, and politicians frequently manipulate their situation. This is why we must constantly bear in mind that despite a due social analysis of the phenomenon, we must not lose sight of the centrality of the person and the reference to a Christian anthropology. The theme proposed this year for World Day of Migrants and Refugees is free to choose whether to migrate or to stay. Embedded in the theme, there is a reminder of the dual right to live in one's own land and the right to migrate freely. Pope Francis, in his message, tells us that, I quote, migrating should always be a free choice, but in fact, in many cases, even today is not, close quotation. There are many causes that today force millions of women, men, and even children to leave their homes in search of a dignified and safe life. Conflicts, natural disasters, or more simply, the impossibility of living a dignified and prosperous life in one's native land. Faced with these great challenges, we often feel powerless. In his message, the Pope instead calls for that common sense of responsibility and solidarity that must lead everyone, not only to ask ourselves what can be or not done, but also to commit ourselves concretely. This means committing ourselves to make every effort to halt the arms race, economic colonialism, the plundering of other people's resources, and the devastation of our common home, Pope says. It also means to ensure to everyone an equal share in the common good, respect for his or her fundamental rights, and access to an integral human development. Only then will the choice to migrate be truly free, because it will have offered everyone the possibility of personal fulfillment and a dignified life. Everyone in various capacities must feel co-responsible in facing the causes and consequences of migration processes. International and national institutions, civil society, local communities, and even individuals. And let us not forget the central role of Christian communities, which can be a truly school and laboratory of welcoming, protecting, promoting, and integrating migrants, refugees, and their families. In our communities, migration should become the sign of witness and prophecy, of witnessing as the responsibility of taking on the suffering and hopes of migrants and refugees is the concrete way of living the incarnated gospel in the existential peripheries. It is the place of prophecy, as no one is the mere spectator, but protagonist in the construction of the heavenly Jerusalem, which is an open, respectful of human dignity and reconciled community. It is a matter of activating those dynamics of communion and co-responsibility of the entire community in the promotion and design of good pastoral practices, where the participative and intercultural aspect is stayed. For this to happen, it is, first of all, necessary to raise awareness and also to train skills. And these are precisely the objectives of these days, raising awareness first and foremost through various approaches to migration issues, at the same time stimulating skills to be able not only to read context, but also to operate in that. The Scalabrini International Migration Institute, CIMI, has been dedicated for 20 years to the preparation, updating, and ongoing training of the competencies related to the theological pastoral dimension of those involved in the front line of human mobility in its concrete forms, through an interdisciplinary itinerary aimed at understanding the phenomenon of human mobility. CIMI acts as a space of evaluation, comparison, and dialogue between theological and pastoral disciplines and the human science in general. Our point of view aims to promote an education where people are protagonists and societies, cultures, and religions are open spaces of participation and dialogue. Among the many training and awareness-raising activities, one deserves special attention. Since 2011, the Diploma in Pastoral Care of Human Mobility, a one-year online training program, has provided more than 800 students and professionals from around the world with a scientific, theological, pastoral understanding of the complexity of forms of human mobility, and enabled them to develop action plans to build communities capable of welcoming, protecting, promoting, and integrating. The migratory flows of our times, Pope says, are the expression of a complex and varied phenomenon that, to be properly understood, requires a careful analysis of every aspect of its different stages, from departure to arrival, including the possibility of return. All this is to highlight today the importance of formation, training, of lifelong learning in the accompaniment of migrants, refugees, internally displaced people, victims of trafficking, and seafarers. Special thanks go to the Dicastery for promoting integral human development that promoted this initiative and is hosting us in this location and is facilitating the technical aspects of the online transmission. I would also like to thank the International Union of Superior Generals, which, as a partner of these training days, facilitated the organization and dissemination of a vast network of congregations. I would also like to express my special thanks to all the speakers who will be taking part in these 4 days. Their acknowledged expertise in dealing with migration issues with diverse approaches will help us to offer the broadest and most in-depth view of the topic discussed. At the same time, we also wanted to highlight some concrete experiences and testimonies to say that promoting and building welcoming communities is possible. I wish and hope that these days will be an opportunity for knowledge, dialogue, and formation on a topic issue that is reshaping the face of our communities and our society. I wish the best for these training days, and thanks again to everyone.
So thank you to Sister Mary John and Father Aldo for their introduction. I am Gioacchino Cantese, I am a Scalabinian missionary, and I will act as moderator during this first day of this training course dedicated to migration as a global human phenomenon. Before going to our, we will have three main presentations during this first day. But before going to our first presentation, again, some points of order. Again, please turn off your microphones. You don't need your microphones because the only people who will need the microphone will be the speakers. If you have any questions or observations regarding the one of the presentation that will be given today, you are allowed to write the observation or the question on the chat, and I will be the one to read your question or observation. Please keep the observation, the question short and to the point. Short and to the point. And also write down to whom, to which one of the speakers you want to address your question and observation. Another point is that after the first two presentation, we will have a 15-minute break. I think there is nothing else. Again, please, the microphones. Keep your hands off the computer unless you have to write down an observation or a question. Okay, thank you. So we will start. We will start with the first presentation. And the title of this presentation will be "Migration in the Americas from Prehistory to the Present." It will be given by Dr. Julia Young, who is a historian of migration, Mexico and Latin America, and Catholicism at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. She's the author of Mexican Exodus, Emigrants, Exiles, and Refugees in the Cristero War in 2015, and co-editor of Local Church, Global Church, Catholic Activism in Latin America from Rerum Novarum to Vatican II, 2015. She has published scholarly articles in the Americas, the Catholic Historical Review, Mexican Studies, Estudios Mexicanos, and the Journal of Migration and Human Security. In 2020-21, Dr. Young was a fellow with the Luz ACLS program in Religion, Journalism, and International Affairs. She's currently writing a new book about Mexico's Unión Nacional Sinergista, and she frequently writes for the media about immigration, border issues, and Catholic immigration history. She received her PhD from the University of Chicago in 2009. Please, Dr. Young, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you so much. I'll just start my timer so I don't speak too long. Thank you so much to Gioacchino Cantese, to Veronica De Sanctis, and the Scalabrini National Migration Institute for inviting me here, and to the Dicastery for promoting integral human development, and the Catholic Sisters Project, and the International Union of Superiors General for holding this wonderful training course, Free to Choose Whether to Migrate or to Stay. And happy National Migration Week to everybody here in Washington. It's quite early in the morning, but we are also beginning at my university a series of events this week to celebrate National Migration Week. So Gioacchino has already introduced me very kindly And so I won't say too much about myself, but just to say that I have now worked and been involved in and thought about and advocated for migrants and migration for probably now around 20 years. I've written about immigration for public audiences, and I've tried to bring what I've tried to do most, and I'm very interested in doing, is bringing history into people's understanding of migration. So many people become interested in migration because they read about it in the news. They see that it's something that is happening currently, but people are not always so aware of the history of migration and the deep history of migration. And I especially focus today in my talk on the history of migration to, from, and within the Americas, so in the Western Hemisphere. I won't talk today so much about migration in Europe, except to the extent that I talk about migration from Europe to the Americas. And now will come the point where I see if I can share my screen, which hopefully is possible, so that I can share some slides with you. Okay, it looks like I can do that. If someone could let me know that they could see my screen just with the thumbs up, that would be good. Okay. Sounds like someone might have a mic on.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, wonderful.
We can see your screen, Dr. Yan.
Okay, fabulous. So I actually, I was a little confused about the title. Joaquino, you read a title that I had submitted, and then on the program I saw a title. So I'll call it this: Phenomenon and History of Human Mobility. And I wanted to add 6 lessons from the past. So I would like to talk about 6 ways that the past can help us understand the phenomenon of migration and human mobility. And so right away, I'll tell you what those 6 lessons are. So I would argue that those 6 lessons are that migration is a part of human history. So is also resistance to migration or nativism. Migration is driven by push factors as well as by pull factors. And because of these factors, border control has always been challenging, if not sometimes impossible. And my final lesson, which I'll get to at the end, is that migration will remain a political hot point for Catholics and for others. So the first lesson from the past, that migration is a part of human history. We could almost say it a few different ways. Migration is a part of being human. To be human is to migrate. Migration has happened really since the dawn of human history. And so here I'll just show a series of maps that show us some sort of different times of migration. So we have this map which shows the very, very ancient, what we call sometimes prehistoric migrations that have happened really since the dawn of mankind. So you see people migrating out of Africa to Europe, to Asia, to Australia, to Oceania, and then over the course of 20,000 to 15,000 years ago to the Americas. And now new discoveries are telling us that those migrations to the Americas perhaps even happened earlier in 40,000 or 35,000 years ago. So clearly migration goes back to throughout and is part of the history of humanity. If we look at our religious history, the Bible is full of migration stories going back to Adam and Eve, right? To the migration from the Garden of Eden, and then with figures such as Noah and Abraham, and then of course Mary and Joseph experiencing migration. When we come to the Americas, when we focus specifically on the Americas, we see that humans came largely from Asia, perhaps also from the Pacific Ocean, and crossed into the Americas, again, between 20,000 to 15,000 years ago, or perhaps as early as 30,000 years ago. And the people that migrated from Asia these dozens of thousands of years ago, it took thousands of years to migrate over the whole territory that was the Americas, that we think of as North and South America. And once they arrived and expanded over the whole territory, they didn't stop moving. Indigenous societies migrated within the Americas over the millennia before Europeans would arrive in 1492. They also competed over territory, and there is archaeological evidence of battles over territory within the North American and South American territories. So they both migrated to populate, and then they migrated within the territories for many thousands of years. Our next turning point, of course, is 1492, when, as I always remind my students, and if you grew up in America, in the United States, you learn the rhyme, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So most of my students know the date 1492, but that is really the watershed moment. It's the beginning of mass global migration. And it's really the beginning of the system that we still live with today, where migrants from Europe first, Africa, and also Asia would begin crossing oceans and populating the continents of the Western Hemisphere, North and South America. It's important to highlight that the first waves of migration would come from Spain and Portugal, of course, the Spanish sailors and conquistadors, and following Columbus in 1492. And then subsequently, there would be migration from other parts of Europe, particularly England, and other parts of Western Europe. That migration was also accompanied by a massive new migration from Africa. And this was, of course, the migration of enslaved people. It was an involuntary migration. These people were taken forcibly out of Africa and were brought to many parts of the Americas, not just, as we learn in the United States, not just to the United States, but in fact, to Brazil, to the Caribbean, to Mexico, and to other parts of South America. By the 1800s, migration had become truly global, with massive migration from Southern and Eastern Europe to both North and South America, and also with a significant migration from Asia to North and South America.
Julia,
yes.
Can you hear me? Could you
Yes.
please change your presentation into the presentation mode?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
It's
please, because it is on the double, you know.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Let me, the problem is I had another screen, so let me just unplug that.
Please.
Okay, and then how's this?
Yes, yes.
Is that better? Okay,
Perfect.
sorry about that.
Thank you very much.
No, it's no problem. Just please, I couldn't see, I can't see the chat, so please, Joaquino, if you need to interrupt me, go ahead. So yes, by the late 1800s, there was a new massive migration from Southern and Eastern Europe to the United States, but also to South America, as you can see here, and then also an Asian migration. And then today, migration is truly global. It is still now the United States is really the major magnet in the Western Hemisphere. And so now we have mass migration from other parts of the Americas, particularly South America and Mexico and Central America, to the United States and to a lesser extent to Canada. From everywhere, but there's also migration to the United States from everywhere in the world. And this map sort of conveys the diversity of that migration. And then, of course, there's also migration, as you who are in Rome know, there's a global migration also to Europe. Western Europe in particular is a major magnet for this global migration. So What I hope this series of maps shows us is that migration is a continuous part of human history. It goes back to our deep prehistory. And what has changed is really the volume or the scale of that migration and also the speed of migration. So if in those first slides, we're talking about thousands of years for people to walk or take small boats across the American continent, we're now looking at migrations that can happen over just a few weeks or a few days, or even a few hours if we're flying. At the same time, having underscored the consistent aspect of migration to human history, I also want to remind everyone that it's important for us to remember that migrants make up only 3.5% of the global population today. So not everyone migrates and not everyone wants to migrate. Often the media overwhelms us with images of mass migration, but stability and settlement in one place is, of course, also part of human history. And I think it's important to remember that. And so it's very helpful that Pope Francis's message is titled "Free to Choose Whether to Migrate or to Stay." That history of staying is also an important part of humanity. So lesson 1 is done, that migration is a part of human history. But now we turn to the second lesson, that so is resistance to migration. Resistance to migration has happened for millennia. One of the words that we often use in migration studies is nativism, the idea that immigrants are harmful to the native born. Right? So the idea that immigrants who are coming from somewhere else are harmful to the people who are born in that country. Another word which the ancient Greeks had was xenophobia, the fear of foreigners or of strangers. And that ancient Greek word tells us that the human impulse to control territory and to seal it off from others or from outsiders has a very deep history. So I already talked about indigenous people in the Americas fighting over territory and fighting to keep each other out of territories that they claimed for their own. And of course, this goes back in our whole history of Europe, Asia, and Africa as well. This deep human impulse to control the movement of others. And one way, if we can remind ourselves of one way that humans have long tried to control the movement of others is by building walls. So we have the Great Wall of China, which dates back to the 7th century before Christ. And of course, the famous Roman walls, the walls of Hadrian, which, those walls were built for military purposes, but also as customs point, also to act as a way to claim and control territory. The Bible is full of borders and boundaries as well. In Exodus 23:31 says, "I will fix your boundary from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines and from the wilderness to the river Euphrates, for I will deliver the inhabitants of the land into your land and I will drive them out before you." So this concept of controlling territory and controlling borders is very old. So we've talked about militaries controlling territories. We've talked about walls being used to control territories. Another historical way of controlling territories or populations is through population transfers or population exchanges. So if we think of the historical expulsions of Jews from territory, of the Roma, of Armenians, the population exchanges of the Greeks and Turks more recently, there are many examples of this in ancient and modern history. Population control and the fear of the foreign, however the foreign is defined, is also intricately connected to the phenomenon of genocide. And of course, we can think of many examples, but in the 20th century, we have the Holocaust in Western Europe, which was related to this idea of the fear of the other, the fear of the person that was defined as the other, defined as not native to a particular land or territory. nativism is a very tricky problem, and I've written and thought about how nativism can get resolved. Nativism is something that is sort of cyclical and can appear and then subside in societies. In the United States, we're really still living in a period of nativism, and that was very, very apparent under the Trump administration during those years, but it's still present and was also predated the Trump administration. And in 2016, I wrote an article about the history of nativism in the United States, in which I concluded that unfortunately newer waves of immigrants often learn nativism as a part of the process of their assimilation. So new waves of migrants come in and become targeted by older waves of migrants. So for example, in the United States, Irish immigrants or the descendants of those Irish immigrants sometimes would attack or speak out against newer waves of migrants, such as Mexican migrants, almost as a way of becoming native themselves or becoming like the native born themselves. And oh, here's another wall that I had wanted to point to say that walls go back in ancient history. And of course, here's the wall between the US and one of the segments of fence between the US and Mexico in the desert. I wanted to underscore that point of nativism being cyclical and nativism occurring across generations, to show this famous cartoon of a woman wearing an anti-immigration banner and sort of waving away boats full of refugees. And then it's pointed out that she herself is a descendant of the people who came on the Mayflower. So in the Americas, at least, everybody can point to a migration in their family history. Even the people that are most anti-immigrant do themselves have a family history of migration. And even indigenous people who may have been here for millennia longer than anyone else did migrate themselves, as I discussed in the prehistory. So I'll talk a little bit more about nativism and the ways that people can work to resist nativism at the end of this talk. But I wanted to underscore that nativism generally makes life harder for immigrants, but it also generally does not succeed at stopping immigration. And the reason for that is our next couple of lessons from history, that migration is driven by a complicated set of factors. And these are known in migration studies as push factors and pull factors. So let's talk about the push factors. The push factors are the events or the phenomena in the sending country, in the homeland or the country of origin, that push people to migrate, right? So what is causing people to want to or to have to leave their homeland? And as an illustration for push factors, I actually point to a migration. I show this to my students. Sometimes a migration that happened within the United States in the 20th century was the Dust Bowl in the 1930s, when there was a drought, and that caused many people in the central part of the United States to have to leave their homes and often walk or drive to the West Coast where they could look for work. And this is something that I point to my US audiences, because we don't often think of Americans as refugees. But of course, more commonly, it's very common to see these images of refugees leaving their home countries, with nothing more but the clothes on their backs. And this is a sort of a timeless, I just picked this one, this is a sort of a timeless image. But so what are the reasons that people would have to leave home with nothing more than their the belongings they can carry with them? Well, we have a number of different possible reasons, and I think as many as there are migrants, but often they fall into several categories. So economics, of course, an economic depression that means that there are no job opportunities or very low wages. And we saw that with, especially with the migrations of the 19th century from Europe from Southern and Eastern Europe to the United States and to other parts of the Americas. And we've seen that all throughout the 20th century and into the 21st. Another reason for migration, which goes back as far as human history, is violence, warfare, genocide, population expulsions, right? Any type of violence will lead to waves of civilians, often women and children, migrating out of their homeland, right? Because it's not safe for them to stay. Another phenomenon that will push people out is when there are very high numbers of young people in a certain culture, right? Or in a certain society. So when there are many people, when there's perhaps a generation with many, many children, and those children survive to adulthood, they're going to be looking for an occupation, for work. Especially this happened in Italy in the 19th century and other parts of Southern Europe, where the population grew very rapidly, partly because of advances in medical technology. But there wasn't enough land and there wasn't enough work for everyone that would have liked to stay and work in the rural part of the country. And so, one word for that is overpopulation, but you might just call it a sort of growth in the number of youth who need employment, who need occupation. Of course, we also have, and this goes into the Bible, so we know this is an ancient cause, is religious persecution, right? When people are targeted, and there are many other kinds of persecution, religious, ethnic persecution, persecution on the basis of membership in a particular group, that can lead to migration, that can push people out. We can see the lack of rule of law and safety as a as a push factor. So if we think about contemporary migrations from Central America, especially to the United States or out of Central America, we see the lack of, we see violence, endemic violence, as a push factor. And I think that also is something that goes way back in human history. And then I don't want to discount the number of migrants in human history who were migrating not necessarily because of all of these negative push factors, but also sometimes because they had a sense of adventure or because they were seeking their fortune. And that is certainly part of the story of migration throughout human history. And then especially when we talk about earlier European migrations to the Americas, you had people that were seeking wealth and people who were seeking land and opportunity. So that was there. That's both a push factor and a pull factor, right? But in the sense that it's someone's dream or desire that they have in the homeland to leave and to try something new, then that's a push factor. Now we can turn, though, to these pull factors. So if the push factors are phenomena in the home country that are pushing people, then pull factors are phenomena in the destination country or in the receiving country that are attracting people to come there. So again, probably the most important in certainly since the 19th century, but also before, was economic opportunity, jobs. If people are leaving their home countries because they can't make enough money there, they're being pulled to the particular destination countries because there are opportunities, there are jobs there, there's a demand for labor. And so this picture is Mexican field workers in the United States who are coming to work in the fields where there was a great demand in the United States, really there has been throughout the 20th century and into the 21st, for laborers who could grow and harvest the crops. And you can see that you can look at these photos and really they look almost the same from the past to the present. This is a 21st century picture of immigrant workers in the United States. Who now come not only from Mexico, but from many other places. And of course, this would be familiar to those of you in Italy, where now in the late 20th and early 21st century, there's been a huge labor demand in the agricultural sector and in the service sector for immigrant labor. Some other pull factors we could think about would be actually land, open land, cheap land, available land. as opposed to exhausted natural resources in the home country. So this is very true for when we talk about the Americas. There has been this, historically, there has been an availability of land and openness of land that has not been so true in Europe in some of the sending countries. Another pull factor we can mention is liberal immigration laws. This is very important in the 19th century in the United States, in Australia, in Latin America, where immigrant agents were actually recruiting migrants. So literally pulling or enticing migrants to come to the Americas. And we have to pay attention to the ways that, I think now in the current period, we pay more attention to the ways that laws exclude migrants, but we also should remember that historically, sometimes laws also attracted migrants. Other factors include the relationship between the sending and the receiving country. So if the United States has a certain relationship with a country, then there might be an immigration flow that starts from that. And then a final pull factor that I'll just mention quickly is technology, which can be both a push and a pull factor. And there are technologies of both transportation. So the easier and cheaper it gets to migrate, the more people migrate from one place to another. So an example of that from history is the construction of the railroads, both from within Europe and then in the Americas. So railroad construction, which began really in the late 1700s and would continue throughout the 1800s, would connect people in small villages to larger towns and cities and then to port cities. And so railroads made it possible for more and more people to migrate out. And then when they landed in the Americas, railroads made it possible for people to migrate to their destinations in the Americas. So that's one example of a transportation technology. And then a communication, the other area of technology is communications. So throughout human history, people have told each other where opportunities are, how to migrate, how to get where they're going. So, there's some speculation that even ancient cave paintings told humans how to migrate and where to migrate, right? Where to go, where the animals were going, where to follow the hunt. That's a sort of speculation, but still, letters would play an enormous role after 1492. Letters carried across the oceans to give people information about where to migrate and how to migrate. And of course, today we have instantaneous communication, social media that both pushes migrants out, pulls migrants to certain destinations, gives them information, some of it flawed information about how and where to migrate. So what's the reason for mentioning all of these complex push and pull factors that I've just mentioned is because to make the argument that because of these factors, because of their variety and their complexity, border control has always been challenging, if not impossible. Right? These walls the images of the walls that I showed you later, none of them have really worked to stop human migration. It's been always, I think, very difficult to devise policies that can control human migration. And when they do work, they sometimes have unintended impacts. And that's, I would argue, because exactly of border control. Border control focuses on the border. It focuses on the places where people are crossing. But these push and pull factors that I've just described to you come from inside the country, from inside the sending country or the sending region, and then from inside the receiving region. So border control tries to affect change at the border, whereas the push and pull factors are much deeper phenomena that impact people far away from the border. So just to point at that history, this is an image of Seville and its Casa de Contratación, it was its house of contracts and trade that was established in 1503 because Spain very much wanted to control who could go to the Americas after 1492 and who could not. And I just put it up there because it was a failure. Spain was not able to control which people and which nationalities went to the Americas. And ultimately that would cause Spain to lose its control over, or its claim over, those territories as more and more people from other European countries and from other religions and from other ethnic groups left to go to the Americas. England in the 1600s would also try to put restrictions on who could leave and who could migrate, but it was unsuccessful. So I would argue here that undocumented migration or unauthorized migration is as old, certainly as old as borders and governments themselves, right? So as long as there have been governments trying to control borders, there have been people trying to get around those borders. And I just put this image to remind us that walls are not always as effective as we think they're going to be. Today in the United States, more than half of all undocumented migrants arrive by airplane, right? So they fly from other parts of the world and they overstay visas. And then even when people do arrive by land, they find ways to get around and under or over, in this case, those walls. So, what that means is that these laws, it's not to say that there's no point to immigration laws, right? And not to say that there's no reason for countries to try to control their borders and to manage the phenomenon of migration, but just to say that it is complicated, that the laws sometimes have unintended consequences, and that especially in big countries like the United States, like Canada, even like Italy or Greece that have very large borders, it's quite difficult for countries and governments to control those borders when there are populations that truly want to migrate for all of those push and pull factors that I've described before. So border control and immigration law can be ineffective. It can also have unintended consequences. For example, in the United States, our last big immigration reform was the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act. And that was meant to actually close down, it was actually meant to reopen migration to Southern and Eastern Europeans and to other Europeans who might want to come to the United States. That was the intended purpose of the law. And what the law did instead, because the push factors in Europe had essentially subsided by 1965 in most of Europe. So what that did instead is open the United States to global migration and meant that migrants began coming from all over the world. So it was an interesting and, in my mind, good unintended consequence, but it was an unintended consequence. So I close with a prediction. So that's about the future, and historians often don't like to talk about the future because we like to talk about the past, but this is a prediction based on history. The previous sort of 5 points I've covered tell us that humans have migrated for all of their history and probably will continue to migrate, that other humans will resist these migrations, right? And particularly governments and people in migrant receiving countries, that push and pull factors, complex push and pull factors are what drive migration, and that migration will remain very difficult to control through laws, through policies at the border. In other words, history suggests that we will not find a way to stop immigration, that those people who would like to stop immigration will probably not find at least not find a simple way to stop it. Migration will continue. So for that reason, excuse me, that is my timer, and I'm just about to close. So for that reason, we will keep seeing debates, especially in immigrant sending countries, over immigration. We'll keep seeing people rally and work to support immigrants, but we'll also probably keep seeing painful images of crosses along the border, of migrants drowning, migrants in deserts, migrants in detention, and migrants who are abused, right? So we'll continue to see these very sort of polarizing debates over migration. And for ourselves as Catholics and just as humans and people that advocate for migrants and believe in the rights of migrants, I think it's going to be very important to think about how we can play a role in those arguments. So, like I said at the beginning, for me, that's really to think and to help talk about how migration is part of human identity and human history. But for other people, and here I have a picture of someone who's been an inspiration to me, Sister Norma Seni Pimentel, who leads the Catholic Charities of the Rio Grande Valley in the border between the US and Mexico, for people like her, they're really getting involved in working on the border. And I think that's where Catholics and the Catholic Church and Catholic sisters have been really instrumental and inspiring, right? So they have worked for to meet the needs of migrants themselves and to speak out on their behalf. I think if I can leave you with one thought, on how to advocate for migrants and migration, or how to think about migrants and migration, it would be to think about those push and pull factors and to work to address issues that are forcing people to migrate under desperate circumstances, and then to advocate for a humane legal framework so that people who need to leave can leave, and then so that people who want to stay can stay. So I think understanding this history can help us advocate more effectively for migrants and for better migration, for better laws around migration. It will remain a complicated issue and phenomenon, but I think it's one that's very worth thinking about, and one that, again, history can help us do. So I conclude my remarks here, and I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Professor Young, for your nice presentation, especially for those 6 key lessons, especially the last. Let's get involved. I remind you again that if you have any question, any observation regarding this first presentation, please write it down and post it on the chat, and then we will take them at the end of the, of this first section, at the end of the 3 presentations. People have already written on the chat asking if they will the presentations, the slides will be shared. We will do that. We will share all the presentation that will be given during the whole course at the very end of the course. So after September 21st. Okay. So thank you again, Dr. Young, and let's go to our second speaker, Father Gabriele Beltrami. The title of this presentation, I hope I will get this right, Narrated Migration Toward Constructive Communication. Father Gabriele Beltrami was born in Rome. He's part of that minority of people who were born in Rome and live and work also in Rome. During his university studies in modern foreign languages and literature, thanks to his increasing awareness of the world of human migration and the church commitment to it, he matured his missionary vocation. In 1995, entered the Congregation of the Missionaries of St. Charles, the Scalabrinians. After studying philosophy and theology and specializing in ecclesiology, he was ordained priest on September 16, 2006. And after 3 years in an intercultural pastoral activity in Switzerland, he undertook studies in social communication sciences in view of a new assignment in the nascent communication area of this institute, which he led for over 10 years. I might add here that he has been now for the since the last 2 weeks pastor in a parish, the parish of the Most Holy Redeemer here in Rome. So thank you, Father Gabriele, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Brother Gioacchino. I'm glad to be here dealing again once more on a topic that is so close to my heart. So some forewords before starting over. Drawing from different disciplinary perspectives, narratives that's our object today, are those attempts led by actors to develop plausible accounts and interpretations of a phenomenon, event, or series of events, a person or a group of persons. In this sense, a narrative is not only a simple description. By definition, narratives are characterized by a certain degree of stability and consistency over time and across space. This is from Jacob 2015. Coming to our topics, narratives on migration in particular, they could be grouped according to two main topics of concern: the process of migration, and on the one hand, and an immigrant's integration on and the management of cultural diversity in all societies on the other. Two main topics, of course, there are many, but just to explain, they introduce the topics. The first one, narratives on the causes, dynamics, and effects of international migration include, for instance, assumptions about push and pull factors, as we heard already, actors involved in the migratory process and consequences of migration, both in sending and receiving countries. Narratives on immigrant integration and cultural diversity include rival claims about those who are already among us, but are not necessarily considered part of us. This may lead to questions such as who is the deserving, why some deserve more than others, and what are the consequences of their inclusion or exclusion within our societies. In public discourse, migration is often discussed in figurative terms, and especially through the use of inundation metaphors such as waves, floods, tides. What is more, metaphors invariably represent individual refugees and migrants as part of a presupposed homogeneous group, privating individuals of the recognition and respect they deserve. Metaphorical language of this kind neither accounts suffering, loss, and trauma, nor does it sufficiently acknowledge that basic human rights are at stake. That's what counts. Metaphors also fuel hostility against refugees and migrants, making successful integration difficult, if not impossible, to achieve. Even worse, metaphors like refugee waves, as well as the derogatory expressions such as mass immigration, claim, for example, that Europe's cultural identity is threatened by liberal immigration policies. I would like just to show something, if I will be, let's see. Okay, there's a problem with audio, so we will stop it, I think. And we go back to our presentation. Sorry, I'm just trying to. Let's go on. So basically, it was an example of how we can deal with this topic, also the visual representation. One way of challenging such stereotypical representation is a humanitarian approach based on narratives and stories. That's our topic, today's topics. Using a generic typology, we may distinguish two types of narrative in discourses on migration. The first type, such as stories of migration, present mobility from an insider's perspective, including various forms of self-expression, from conversational storytelling to artistic forms of communication, life stories, through images, audiovisual media, poetry, short stories, memoir, and novels. Ideally, stories of migration grant migrants full authority and control over their narratives. Stories of migration always entail a struggle for narrative agency. The second type is narrative of migration, approach migration from an outside perspective. Such as narratives can take the shape of master narratives, mini narrations based on metaphors, conversational frames, or any kind of public discourse. Migration studies, as well as we can easily understand, is a particularly broad field, ranging from quantitative approaches in economics and social sciences, literary criticism. What is in common, however, is that if they present any lived experience of migration at all, they do so primarily from an external perspective, as we said at the beginning. Stories of migration and narratives on migration so represent the extreme ends of a scale which welcomes various hybrid forms. Thus, a wide variety of narratives uses migrant stories to raise awareness. That was an example I tried to show you before. Highlighted the humanitarian catastrophe behind a metaphorical expression like migration flows and campaign for liberal migration policies. The functional approach acknowledges that journalists employ life stories for different reasons. We can introduce a distinction between vicarious storytelling, such as the act of speaking on behalf of someone else, which is typical of migrant advocacy and humanitarian narratives, and empowering storytelling, such as initiatives which provide the opportunities for migrants to share their story. Both forms of storytelling seek to establish a humanitarian narrative of migration. In order to establish a new, fairer narrative of migration, we need to move beyond widespread forms of vicarious storytelling. So, I mean, rather than speaking for migrants or about migrants, we should once for all speak with and listen to them. Level telling field can be understood as playbooks and mechanisms guaranteeing a fair dialogue on an equal footing on various levels, from local events with migrants, aid workers, and stakeholders to public narrative on migration. I won't try back to show you this video because I think it won't work, but you will find it in your PPT file. The result of is participation grounded in dialogue and meaningful conversation. Rather than indirect representation through the streamlined mini stories or quotes typical of vicarious storytelling, or the framed narratives generated by public debate. Storytelling is a process, so the act of narration, which involves event modeling and event management, can be viewed as a performance for the speaker's intended audience. In this sense, storytelling as a process or activity is always embedded in a specific social context that informs the way the story is told. The voluntary decision to tell and share a story is a form of empowerment for the migrant, turning storytellers into agents with a high degree of authority and control over their narrative. These results in important circumstances such as forced displacement and transit that always deprive people. Stories of migration can take various forms, such as informal oral storytelling among friends, family, acquaintances, and aid workers and volunteers too. Either in face-to-face communication or by phone. This is the dominant form of storytelling among migrants in transit who rely on this kind of information exchange in order to plan the next steps of their journey, make new contacts, share experiences, and find new motivation to carry on. Migrant stories are routinely employed in humanitarian campaigns by NGOs whose mission is often to offer assistance to individuals, document human rights violations, and stand up for refugee protection publicly. The information is backed by case stories, anonymized microbiographies offering factual information. Nor are these stories designed to give migrants a voice. Their purpose is to illustrate and support the political aims of the agency as an organization whose humanitarian narrative of migration is as simple as it is compelling. The individual matters. Although migration studies is a broad and diverse research field with a high degree of interdisciplinarity, conceptual transfer between economics, sociology, and political science on the one hand, and literary and cultural studies on the other, is still in its infancy. Its comprehensive cross-disciplinary overview of the field may be an important resource in many ways. Challenging existing power structure from various angles, these approaches are, however, vital for a more inclusive migration debate and should therefore be integrated into any cross-disciplinary migration research. One of our words in the beginning of this title was constructive. So constructive journalism calls for going beyond quoting just the elites and for bringing all other voices into the news discourse. Positive framing appears in the article that delve deeper into reporting and present the positive constructive aspects of immigrants in life, as well as the assets that migrants and immigrants and refugees contribute to society and to the construction of societal cohesion. The use of alternative voices, lack of collective negative constructions, individualizing the reference to the bad doer, and the contextualization of issues contribute to the positive frames and counters negative collective stereotypes. Thus, a global hybrid society that fits a global world is reflected in the reporting, where all citizens have a voice and are treated individually, not collectively. I would like to end with a toolkit just to make it a bit clearer, I hope. First, instrument that we can use. Empower the base, engage the middle, define and marginalize the extremists. It means we want to build, or we should build a movement with different actors employing the three tactics that I explained in this first slide. Respect those playing different roles. Journalist suggests that. Second instrument, if you negate a frame, you evoke a frame. If you use the words and frames of your opponents, it means that you are playing on their field. So change the story. Values unite, issues divide. So policy, evidence, and issues are called and appeal to expertise. Values are warm, let's say, and appeal to community goals. We, together, we can make a difference. Again, walk a mile in their shoes. It means getting into the thinking, emotional space of the movable middle of people on the move. It can be challenging, I know, but it is a key first step for campaigning, communicating, narrating. Understanding does not equal agreement. So mapping out the positions and emotions of others to gain deeper insight is necessary, not a compromise. Lead with positive messages and solutions to restructure the debate. So don't get stuck countering the frames of opponents. Rather, be proactive with positive stories that broaden the debate. Almost at the end, images speak volumes. So strong culturally resonant images, memes, are often as important as what you say in a campaign. Images are sometimes stronger. Again, messages need the right balance of resonance and dissonance. It means wrap your messages first in thinking what is familiar and reassuring for your audience. Then add a twist to challenge their existing position. It's a sort of strategy that works. Message is in an authentic voice. To be convincing, to find a balance between engaging the values of the middle, but not giving up on your principles. Last, the messenger is as important as the message. So find unusual allies who are trusted voices for your audience and willing to share positive messages. I forgot the last, sorry. Prepare for challenging exchanges. The debate is eaten and often oversimplified and over-dramatized. So it's crucial to prepare your team, to anticipate difficult questions, to stay calm and stay on message. I forgot to, sorry. Don't be the stereotype that your opponents expect, please. Stereotypes of progressives, weak, angry, unpatriotic, uninformed, and holistic. In your communication, don't be predictable or easily categorized. The end for now. So the success of specific migration narratives in the present is in part the fruit of success in the past, as new narratives must accord with persistent master narratives. If they hope to resonate to the ears of most of the actors involved, casting archetypical characters that must be fit to the assigned role. To conclude, it is very hard and seldom possible for a specific event related migration narrative to achieve success if it is not converged and in synchrony with the pre-existing master narrative of society. Indeed, migration narratives, and more generally our attempts to make sense of this complex and often disorienting world we live in, have a very strong inertia that is perhaps proportional to their vital importance for both the individuals and the society meant as a whole. So let us cooperate more and more in such constructive process of building up a new and fairer narrative. Thank you.
Really the issue of changing the narrative, of changing the story, and also to build on positive stories. Again, I remind you that if you have any questions, any observation about this presentation by Father Gabriele, please post them, write them down on the chat, so that they will be taken up at the end of this, at the very end of this session. Right now, we, as I told you earlier, we will have a 15-minute break. So please take your coffee, stretch your legs, and be ready for the next speaker, the next presentation in 15 minutes. Thank you.
Your classmate or your teacher? Did you go there to find out?
Because when they are my class, everybody I took thought for.
No, I think he was a primary 3, is it?
Yes.
Primary what now?
Yes.
What class are you now? What class are you?
Primary 5 now.
Just go, you know the teacher in plan 4 be nice. Easy to check it out. Go to his former class. Is it Mr.
It's Mr. Adam. I went there for that other boy. So he told me that it's that boy. But he don't know I should come and take Mr. Adam. Yeah, him I didn't see Mr. Adam. So I will see.
Are they having children there this year?
Their names, they are with their names.
I'll be convinced. Go. Oh, no, well done. I just say, Mama don't carry go there too. I know, but the car is leaking. I forgot to tell you where they do this thing.
Okay.
It's leaking.
That rubber.
Then this.
This morning, I don't.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm grateful.
I will get.
No, it mustn't be today now. I want to do it today. Maybe when you are coming tomorrow, we're not going anywhere. Maybe instead of going up and down, I'll be going around. Unless you want to go for your break, and go for your break.
So, and welcome. We will begin in 2 or 3 minutes. Hello, welcome back. Yeah, we can start with the third presentation for this first session of this training course. Again, I remind you to write your observation and questions on the chat, post them on the chat, and please turn off your microphones. Don't touch your microphones. Thank you. So the third presentation, the title is "There is no health without mental health, promoting and protecting the holistic health of migrants and refugees" by Dr. Alessia Puddu. Dr. Alessia Puddu is a psychologist, a psychotherapist with an integrated relational approach, familiar mediator. She's an expert in ethnopsychology and developmental and adult psychodiagnostics. These are hard terms to pronounce. Member and manager of the reception desk and internships in Etna. Then most probably Dr. Puddu will explain what is Etna. She has been involved for years in psychological support for migrant and adoptive families, political refugees, and unaccompanied minors. She has been invited in many congresses, seminars, and courses on this topic. She has collaborated on the matter with the University of Cagliari in Sardinia, Italy, with the Bambino Gesù Pediatric Hospital, which is the hospital that is run by the Holy See, with the Opera Don Calabria, and with Defense for Children. In her private practice, she deals with teenagers, adults, families, and couples coming from different parts of the world. Again, the title is "There is no health without mental health, promoting and protecting the holistic health of migrants and refugees." Dr. Puddu, the floor is yours.
Good morning to all of us. Thanks for having invited me. Can you hear me well? Okay, Sounds good. So I try to show you my presentation. So let me know if you can see it. Okay. Let's see. It's okay?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So, first of all, yeah, you talk about ETNA, that is the association that I'm a member of this association that is called, trying to translate from Italian to English, ETNA Psychology Project. Is an association settled in Rome, born in 2007. We provide psychotherapy sessions for people from different cultures. And our mission is to take care of the person, respecting his identity, its painful part, and working on its resources. So mental health represents a milestone for everyone, especially for whom came across a migration process with all its phases that the speaker before explained and comment and underline a lot. But it's so important to be careful which kind of lens we wear to look to migrants and refugees. And it's the aim of my presentation of today. So first of all, what is psychology? So psychology is the scientific study of the mind and behavior according to the American Psychological Association. Psychology is a multifaceted discipline and includes many subfields of study. What is psychotherapy? Psychotherapy is a type of treatment that can help individuals experiencing a wide array of mental health conditions and emotional challenges. Psychotherapy can help not only alleviate symptoms, but also certain types of psychotherapies, especially, for example, what we practice in ETNA, can help identify the psychological root causes of one's condition so a person can function better and have enhanced emotional well-being and healing. So, when we talk about psychology, we have to remember that we have a different type of psychology, the developmental, the clinical, and one of these interesting area of psychology that is quite recent is what we call ethnopsychology. But first of all, we have to come back to what ethnopsychiatric is, because maybe, as you know, first, normally we talk about psychiatric and then we talk about psychology, two different areas, but that they try to collaborate. So what is ethnopsychiatric? A very interesting word. So first of all, it came from Greek, and we have three words, we may say. So psyche, that is meaning mind or soul, iatreia, that is mean healing, so concerned to treatment, to cure, and ethnos, that regard race and ethnicity. So what is ethnopsychiatry? It examines not only other cultures' understanding of mental illness, but also method of treatment other than standard Western procedures. We have to, it's so important for social workers for whom work with migrants that we have to keep in mind that, of course, all of us have a different social and cultural background. So also for psychology, and that during the last decades in particular, it became a challenge. We need, and it's so important, and we need to train it, to be trained and to training. What is ethnopsychology? So to define ethnopsychology, I just use some phrase that I really like, and that maybe help you to understand also what I do, what we do as ethnopsychology. And Devray, that I forget to tell you, was the first doctor, because he was a doctor, that in 1950, so for this reason that I said that is very recent, no, it's recently that we talk about ethnopsychiatric and ethnopsychology, George Devereux, for the first time, talk about ethnopsychiatry, so the application of psychiatric in different culture. And he used a very important phrase. He said that when the encounter with the other is a knowledge of self. So it means that is a bi-directional process when we meet the other, but it means when we meet the other in all the relationship that we decide to have with the other, a psychological relationship, a friendship relationship, a religious relationship. Coppo, that is an Italian doctor, talk about a process of acculturation, that I think that is a very interesting word. So acculturation refers to the process that occurs when groups of individuals of different cultures came into continuous first-hand contact, which changes, and I would say also transform, the original culture patterns of either or both groups. Cyril Nilke, that is one of the major experts in the world talking about resilience, underline that is an exchange between two or more cultures that meet each other. So we are trying to see how the relationship, the psychological relationship means meeting each other. No, the speaker before me talked about communication, the importance of communication and how we communicate. And so we influence, we affect each other when we decide to have a relation. And it's so important to underline what happens normally in our life. So encountering the other means applicate, we may say, polarization and oversimplification. So the most common form of oversimplification is gross polarization, viewing phenomena in terms of black or white, good or bad, either or instead of both and. Accordingly, the affected persons would experience themselves just as a victim or survivors, vulnerable or resilient, unable to hold on to the complex reality, which is that, to varying degrees, of course, they are both resilient as well as vulnerable, survivor as well as victims, damaged as well as enriched. More specifically, the oversimplification of their perception make it very difficult for them to discern that. In addition to their helplessness, they have also been able to retain some of their previous strength. In such situation, gross form of polarization became endemic, spreading like a virus in all shapes and forms, and at all levels. Then the tendency is to perceive the fundamental alteration to the realities of those who were exposed to such form of adversity, as producing either exclusively negative or exclusively positive effect. So it's so important to keep in mind this division: good, bad, survivor, victim. And to describe this, and it's something that happened to all of us in many relationships that we have in our daily routine, I used a very important graph taken from Renos Papadopoulos, that is the main expert in the world talking about refugees, psychological help in refugees population. And Papadopoulos, and before him Cartman, and he called it the drama triangle, while Papadopoulos called it the victim triangle, focus on three persons, we might say. Okay, victim, rescuer, perpetrator. So the victim triangle, it helps us appreciate the close reciprocal interconnection among the three roles: victim, perpetrator, and rescuer. There can be no victim without a perpetrator, if you think, and no perpetrator without a victim. Similarly, none of them can exist without the rescuer, and the rescuer cannot exist if the first two were not there in the first place. So when we construct a relationship, is a psychological relationship or different kind of relationship, is very simple to collocate in one of these roles. And it's very simple that this role may change. Okay, because as a psychologist, I may say, okay, I'm the rescuer of my patient because he is the poor victim, but I would very quickly became his perpetrator if the patient feels that I cannot help him, for example. Okay, and it's a triangle that continuing until what? Until we decide, we know the rules, we know that it's very simple to enter in one of these roles. And so if we keep in mind this triangle is more simple to avoid, okay, to enter in one of these roles. But so we talk about victim. So when we hear the word victim, we always think about trauma. Is connected. But it's so important to look through the etymology of trauma. That is so interesting. So first of all, the word trauma has emerged, we may say, as the most suitable perspective, as it's the only one that privileges the external reality, and is a medical term that is referred to an injury or wound. It came from a Greek word, titrosko, and this is very interesting because titrosko came from that, it means to pierce, okay? But titrosko came from teiro. Teiro means to rub. But a recent investigation into the etymology of the word trauma, made up by Papadopoulos, Renos Papadopoulos, revealed interesting new perspective, which show that titrosko came from the verb teiro, as I told you, which means to rub, and had in ancient Greek two connotations: to rub in and to rub off, to rub away. Therefore, trauma is the mark left on a person as a result of something being rubbed onto them. Then, insofar as the rubbing is one of two kinds, we could have two different outcomes, from rubbing in, an injury or a wound, and from rubbing off or rubbing away as a cleaning, as in a cleaning a surface where there were marks previously. With reference to refugee, to migrant people in general, person may be either injured, in a psychological term, to varying degrees of severity as a result of being exposed to violent events, to rubbing. Or alternatively, they may experience, in addition to the distress, a sense of renewal, rejuvenation, and revitalization, when the powerful and potentially injurious experience erase previous values, routines, and lifestyles, and introduce new meaning to their life. So this second outcome of rubbing is not a linguistic invention or a theoretical abstraction, but it corresponds to the reality when people following a painful or traumatic event are shaken and gradually became aware that they now look at themselves and the world in a different way. For example, by appreciating life, friendship, work more than the pursuit of petty and meaningless quest. With reference to trauma, to the trauma approach to refugees and migrants, these two meanings of trauma have an important consequences. So we consider normally the person who became refugees, or in particular refugees, but also migrant, as being traumatized and in need of help. This, of course, may be true. However, if we are not carefully, this very reasonable approach can have some fairly negative consequences. So the second meaning of trauma, rubbing off, rubbing away, is less noticeable, although not less known. And it's well known that following a difficult and an intense experience, people may respond in ways that emphasize the renewing rather than the injurious effect of the experiences. So despite or even of the pain, disorientation, disruption, devastation, and loss, people may still feel that a very same traumatic experience also made them reevaluate their priorities in life. So this means that paradoxically, you may say, despite the negative nature, devastating experiences may also help people reshuffle their lives and imbue them with new meaning. So, of course, this is so important to remember that we have a lot of number of variables. For example, personal. The personal variable must represent the history of ourselves, psychological characteristic, coping mechanism, strength or weakness, experiences before the trauma, status, education. We have the relationship, the relational supporting system, so family, community, gender, power position, circumstances of the actual devastating events, meaning given to the events and the experience of these events, and hope or the lack of hope. Normally, when we talk about victims, so we talk about victim trauma, okay, maybe a lot of you heard once in your life what is the PTSD, the post-traumatic stress disorder. That's normally is one of the more frequent that we associate with a migrant or refugees. So just to let you know, the post-traumatic disorder is a disorder, so a psychiatric disorder that develops in some people who have experienced a shocking, scary, or dangerous event. Symptoms of PTSD usually begin within 3 months of the traumatic event, but they sometimes emerge later. So to meet the criteria for PTSD, a person have a symptom for longer than 1 month, and the symptoms must be severe enough to interfere with aspects of daily life, such as relationship or work. But what I want to present today, I want to show, is a new way to look to trauma. Now, as we already said when we talk about the definition of trauma and to rubbing away. So I think it's very clear that when we live a traumatic experience, we can react in a different way. So we have different levels. So the negative, what always Renos Papadopoulos called the negative, the neutral, and the positive one. And of course, we have different areas in which we can experience the traumatic exposition. So the individual, the family, the community, and the society or the culture. So the negative, I think, is so important because, as you can see, we not only have the PTSD, but we have different levels. What we can call this, the first one before the PTSD, going to a neutral one, is what we call distressful psychological reaction. So this refers to the wide variety of negative psychological reactions that do not amount to an actual psychiatric diagnosis, but at the same time have a detrimental effect on the individual. Not all refugees, migrants who exhibit these symptoms require especially professional attention. Then we have what we call ordinary human suffering. And this is the most common and human response to tragedies in life. Suffering is not always a pathological condition, and that is so important to underline. Suffering is a part of life and is not useful always to medicalize or pathologize it. No professional help is needed to address this type of response to adversity. Oh, well, I may say maybe, yeah, a psychotherapy session or a religion community, all of us, of course, need what we need, no? That is totally individual. Then we have a neutral one that is called resilience. And that is a new point of view that I want to show you, because normally resilience is the positive one. While collocating resilience in the neutral one, it means that, first of all, just to, for the whom it doesn't know, if you don't know about resilience, so resilience, the word resilience came from physics, okay, and specifically refer to the positive characteristic and function that survive to the exposure to adversity without being affected either negatively or positively. So these include a wide variety of everyday functions that often we take for granted. Continue to be able to look after oneself, for example, and maintain one personal hygiene. Every person has many hygiene, okay, that is seen, no, maybe we take for granted, but no, it's important to underline that is something that we probably do, or we probably react in this way. Every person has many positive abilities and characteristics, for example, sense of humor, and that they may not be affected by the exposure to adversity, either positive or negative. So why we talk about resilience in a neutral way? Because we had a positive reaction to trauma, what we call AAD, Adversity Activated Development. It refers to the positive developments that are a direct result of being exposed to adversity. That is, it seems paradoxical, I know, but is all I tried to explain before to when I show you the difference of the verb titrosko, okay, to rubbing away. So there are endless accounts of individuals and groups who found meaning in their suffering and were able to transform their experiences in a positive way, finding new strength and experiencing transformative renewal. So people in this situation often say how, as a result of the harrowing experiences, they are now more compassionate to human suffering and are determined to make better use of their own lives. So, why this concept is so important in psychotherapy and in psychological relationship? Because if we keep in mind that the person who came to have, to receive a psychological, a psychological session, we may say, is not a victim, only a victim, no, we say, is not only traumatized people, but normally I call some of them heroes. And maybe all of you know this, the kintsugi, that is the art of putting broken pottery pieces back together with gold. It's a Japanese art. And you can create an even stronger, more beautiful piece of art. That is what we have in our mind when we work with migrants and refugees, which I try to imagine like this bat. And I try to help him or her to look at his life in this sense. So the migrants' challenges in psychotherapy, and I assume, because of course it's a big topic, is the regaining an identity of one's own. Is re-narrating trauma is so important. We have to learn that in this situation, this devastating situation, but maybe for all of us, even if we are not living a traumatic experience in that very moment, trying to narrate our life, our story, is so important. Regaining possession of an idea of home as a safe place. And that is a very interesting concept because home is not, of course, the house, but home regard everything that we remember, we link about what our home in general. So friendship, family, culture, religion, everything. Mastering a new language that allows for the sharing of cultural history. Integrating the two cultures, because of course we have a culture that we lived, we may say, or we feel lost, but it's not lost. We simply have to integrate with the new one, and we have the culture that hospits us. So it's important to create a bridge, I always say. Keeping memories alive. So what happened to migrants, to refugees when they look for a psychologist is that they arrive feeling disoriented, lost, vulnerable, but it's not means victim or only traumatized. So remember the kintsugi, the kintsugi art. It means that you need to put together all the pieces and to see their life in another way. Also, trying to throw away all the sources, the resources that he have. Also talking about his traumatic experience, of course. For a psychotherapist, as you can imagine, but I guess in all of us that work with people, all of us that work with migrants and refugees, empathy is a very important concept. And empathy, remember, that is the ability to share another person's feelings and emotion as if they were your own. So what the psychotherapist in a room need to do with the patient is to understand and modulate is the deep consequences of the migration experience, to listening and welcome to this experience and to all of his background. And to conclude, I want to show you what the World Health Organization suggests and talk when we talk about mental health needs for migrants and refugees. Overcoming barriers to receiving mental health care. Ensure an access to mental health service that unfortunately in Italy, but not only in Italy, is not so simple. Also because, for example, many colleagues are not specialized in ethnopsychologists, and that is a problem because we have to, when we work with culture, and I hope that this brief presentation will leave you this particular point, we have to keep in mind that is full of details. We have different lens. That is not our lens. Is not my glasses. But we have to need and to integrate also what the patient are trying to explain to us, no? Especially if it comes from a culture such a different to our culture. Not discriminatory, and it's a challenge, we may say. Work on communication also with cultural mediator. Integrating mental health in primary health care. And I would say starting from the pediatrician, the doctor, the hospital, ensuring continuity of care, addressing social determinants and promoting social integration and inclusion. So this is what the World Health Organization said. This is what we need and we have to do. but you know that sometimes it's an utopia. So to conclude, I would like to read you a phrase that Devray, so the first doctor who depicted the ethno-psychiatric as an area of psychiatry and psychology, that he said, "After all, as many peoples as culture resemble each other more than they differ, for the simple reason that all human beings are first and foremost human beings, and only secondarily Eskimesi or Bantu, and that all culture are genuine champions of culture, with capital letter, defined as a characteristic human product of the species. They are only secondarily champions of a specific cultural area." Okay, thanks for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Pudu, for this presentation on a most important issue, like the mental health of migrants, and this journey which you have led us through psychology, psychotherapy, ethnopsychology, trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, and to finish also with this positive approach to migrants. This interest in the image of the golden threads, that put together the broken pieces of a pottery as a symbol of what should be done. And with the idea that certainly one lesson from your presentation is that when it comes to the mental health of migrants and refugees, culture matters a lot. Thank you again. So now we will, I will ask you again to post your questions or observation on the chat, so that you so that we will take some of them and address them to our speakers. I don't know if there was one of the speakers, I think Dr. Professor Yang, that had to go because of family matters. But the other two speakers are present. So we will go now and check, the chat to see if there are some questions or observations that we can share. So give us some time, little time. Aside from the message of thank you very much, very interesting, very powerful, very nice, excellent, etc., etc. Let's see. Then earlier there are some questions. The lesson was so. Let's see. There was question for Julia Young. Yeah, but Julia Young is Dr. Young is.
I'm still here. Actually.
You're still there.
Yes,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
still here.
So let's take advantage of that. Don't run away.
Okay, I won't run away.
Don't run away. Yeah. Okay. Here there was a question: is the current model of the EU, European Union, where citizens of EU member countries are able to migrate to other member countries for a work, a good one to start, especially for the North American, US-Canada context, where there is also labor shortage in agricultural work, but plenty of people wanting to migrate to US-Canada due to economic and safety reasons. Perhaps this way farm laborers' rights be protected and strengthened as well. I don't know what you say about this observation question.
That's interesting. I guess the question is, would an European Union model work for North America? I would just say, well, first I would say, does the EU model work for the EU? Right, because I know there is labor migration, of course, within the European Union, but then what I was talking about before with these push and pull factors, the push and pull factors are very strong. The push factors are very strong in countries outside the EU. So if we're looking at migration into the European Union, there is internal migration, for example, from Southern European countries to Northern European countries, from Italy or Greece to Germany, for example. But then that's not enough to meet the demands for labor. And it's not enough to meet the demands especially in the agricultural and service sectors of the European economy. And so I think that's one of the reasons you see pull factors that are stretching into places outside the EU. And then of course, those push factors, you have people in Africa, in the Middle East who are being pushed out of their countries and looking to migrate into the EU. And they are coming from outside the legal context of the citizenship context, right? And so they're migrating in as undocumented workers. And I would think, unless there was some kind of union of all of the Latin American countries with the United States and Canada, which is pretty hard to imagine, I would think that a union of North American countries, Mexico, the United States, and Canada would be interesting as a thought experiment, but it wouldn't address the push factors pushing people out of the rest of Latin America and then out of other places in the globe where people are trying to go to the United States. So it's interesting to think about, but I think the EU doesn't even really work for migration, the context of migration to the EU from the rest of the world. So I'm not sure it would work in the United States. I hope that's a clear enough answer to the question. It is an interesting question.
Thank you, Professor Young. There is here an observation also for Father Gabriele about something he said during his presentation. Yes, it is true that some organizations and groups in collecting stories of migrants are doing so not to really present the situations of the migrants and to respond to them, but to answer the goal of the organization for publication. Can you say something about that, Gabriele?
So, of course, I didn't want to generalize the situation, but it happens. So, as I was saying at the end, we should always converge and be in symphony with the pre-existing master narrative, also among NGOs. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I mean, it's a part of the story. So we want to cooperate also with them so we can take something good out of that too.
I am looking here for other requests, and maybe there are here 10 new messages. Maybe, okay, for maybe there is here Alessia. Thank you for sharing in such a simple manner. I wonder how we can implement and address hierarchy of needs, Maslow. This is another psychologist. The trauma sometimes is not having what they need to help get started in a new country where they face disillusionment. Dr. Fudu?
Yeah. It's an affirmation, I guess. No? Yeah. Definitely. I agree. And when we talk about needs, because the Marco Casetta talk about the Maslow, that is a sociologist, that talk about different type of needs. And in this case, of course, we talk about the mental health needs, for migrants, for refugees. And I would like also to answer to a question that I saw before that was directed to me, the practical ways to deal with trauma. So which kind of instrument we may have to deal with trauma. So, of course, in a psychological point of view, we may say that we have different approach. What I may say that the approach that we use in Etna is a Jungian approach, because you know that the main, the father of psychoanalysis is Freud, but Jung was Freud's student. And we definitely believe as an Etna, as a ethnopsychologist, that it's so important to go in deep the traumatic situation, the traumatic event. I don't remember, but I read something, some comment about also my presentation. Well, when we talk, maybe some of wrote that it's so important to remember that the psychological session is important both for traumatized people and not for all of us that think and want to give a different meaning to our life, want to discover deeply ourselves, even if, of course, well, starting from a very important concept, in my opinion, we have to pay attention of what we intend for trauma, okay? Because normally, of course, trauma is a devastating event. But because I work a lot with family, and so I have also in my session children. For example, for a child, a traumatic situation, maybe, I don't know, I remember many years ago when a child told me that he was desperately because his fish that he has in his house died. And it was, for him, was a devastating event. For the family, wasn't nothing. Nothing had happened. No, it's life. A fish, of course, that we decide to put in a bowl in our house can die. But for this child, it was a traumatic event. So remember that, of course, when we define traumatic, we have what we saw in the grid. So the PTSD, that's what may represent a psychiatric disorder and may deal with, more linked with very, very hard experience, okay? But the different range of traumatic experience that we live differ for all of us. So that we have different treatment, different psychological treatment. For example, we have group therapy session that could be very important for people who want to share together the emotion, the experiences in life. Normally we work one by one, so the psychotherapy and the patient. But for example, in Devre model, he always invited all people linked and belong to the patient. So it could be a part of his community, his family, the linguistic mediator, and you can imagine that he need a very, very big room because he wrote some interesting session in which there were like 15 persons in the room. That is something that, for example, in Etna we doesn't do. Okay, sorry, maybe I was going on.
Okay, no, thank you also. No, thank you, because there was also a question how to deal with, in practical ways, with trauma. So I guess you answered also partly that question. There is another question for you, Dr. Tutu. Where migrant ministry, I mean, people who work with migrants and refugees, do not have access to skilled personnel, I mean psychologists or psychiatrists. How can I help with my basic listening skills? What I am asking, can listening help in the absence of specialized care?
Definitely yes. Definitely yes. Because as I told before, simply try to help the other to re-narrate his history is so important. And maybe all of us can get in touch with our history. So when we lived a particular moment, simply talking with someone, okay, could be my God, could be a pastoral religious, could be a psychologist, help a lot, definitely. But sorry if I repeat again, because for me it's so important to transmit this concept. Remember that triangle. So you are not the perpetrator, the rescuer. We are not in front of a victim. We simply, as we learn, talking about Debre and Coppo, is a process of acculturation. So I here with you, but simply because we are entering a relationship in which I try to help you, but maybe you help me as well in a different way. It's a bi-directional relationship. That is so important. We are not the rescuer.
Thank you again. Now there is a question, and most probably we can address to Professor Young and also to Father Gabriele. In India, the word migrants generally implies slum dwellers and poor people. However, there are many migrants, internal migration, this is a type of migration, who are the floating population in cities, but not financially poor. Such stereotypes prevent a right approach to pastoral care because they too face many issues and need welcome, inclusion, and care. What can you say about that?
I was waiting for Professor Young. So basically,
I'm
yes,
so
of course.
sorry.
No, don't worry. I will just take
I
your
just
words.
walked out of the room and came back, but I'm happy to talk about that. It does seem like it might be a question for you, though, about terminology.
So I was saying that maybe, first of all, we should always remember that we have to meet with people. We have to go in their shoes, to be in their shoes, and to know exactly the average and the amount of situations that there are so many and so different when we talk about migration people and floating people that have been dealt with and been underlined by the Dr. Sister Mary Josefa. So yes, basically we should always remember that migration implies a huge coverage of the situations, and we cannot just simplify those stereotypes. Otherwise, we also can fall into the same mistakes, and we risk to stereotype the same issues. So basically, it's important to have a broader vision about migration and migration narratives.
Thank you, Father Gabriele. There is another question, observation for Dr. Alessia Puddu. However, there is much interest in these psychological issues and mental health issues about migration. However, the church needs more sisters or lay people who have knowledge in psychological studies. How the church in its pastoral care can respond positively to that trauma issue. We need more personnel in that field.
Yeah, I think that she gave the answer, in the sense that psychology, of course, I guess that psychologists and pastoral care need to come together, need to work together. So it's important that talking about also psychological simply concept, that it seems to be very, very easier, but I think that it's so important to be training this. So the concept of empathy, that is not so simple, because empathy, it doesn't mean being a sponge, no? So the concept of the listening, simply listening without talk, for example. Now, sometimes we spend like 50 minutes I spend 50 minutes in my psychological session in silent, because the person in front of me need to be listened. So I think it's a training, and it's important to come together, definitely.
Thank you.
So another affirmation, yeah.
Yeah, there is another one.
Yes.
Thank you for your response. I am a psychotherapist and work with the trauma survivors. The challenge is to create the space to help address trauma, which is so important, and work with others in a multidisciplinary approach to help find ways to address in practical ways the immediate needs. That helps in the healing process.
Yeah, we have to construct network, I may say, and to work in a network. That is not so simple.
There is a new message. Let's see. Thank you for your. I don't know if any of you, any of the speakers wants to add something to wrap up, their presentation. something that you consider important. Father Gabriele, maybe we start with you.
I heard that already from a father, from Alessia, that the networking is the secret. So we should always try to focus on the networking with everybody, not just with those with whom it's easier to network. So try to have a sort of master guideline that is to work together. Trying also to find out if there is some good to take out from the master narratives around working around, and to cooperate in order to better them, to make them more constructive than before, and more based on true life stories and true life protagonists that could receive for once for all a chance to lift up their voice and to tell their stories completely.
Thank you, Father Gabriele. Dr. Young, do you want to
Sure.
To add something?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that listening to the other two presentations together with mine made me think about the ways that migration and migrants are so stereotyped and so simplified in the media by politicians. And so, you know, when you challenge these sort of narratives and tropes about migration, and when you look at migrants as human beings with psychological, with psychological needs and people in need of healing, and then I would argue when you look at the long history of migration and you try to put it into context, all of that is useful in fighting these sort of both these stereotypes and then the simple solutions that politicians, especially during election seasons, will try to offer or present about migration. So in that sense, I think that to me, that's what these presentations taken together make me think of, is the ways to bring nuance and complexity to discussions of migration, which I think is so important because there's just so much simplification of the topic and of migrants themselves in the public sphere. So thank you. It was wonderful to listen to the other presentations and to the discussion.
You, Dr. Young, I don't know, Dr. Pudu, you want to?
Only one thing, so just according to what Julia already said, that they know about the network, about, for example, our presentation that definitely were linked together. For example, when we used to have like to prepare a training course, also simply to psychologists, we always put all the part concerning migration process, type of migrant, etc. Also because as a psychology, we have to keep in mind, for example, in which is all the process, no? First of all, that so the sociological process, no, about migration, and it's so important for us to understand in which part of the life circle the migrant decide or not, of course, to migrate. So definitely the sociologic point of view, the pastoral care, everything are definitely linked. So network, the keyword network, I think that may sum up what we are trying to say.
Okay, thank you again. Thank you to all our wonderful speakers and their really insightful presentations. And of course, we continue tomorrow. So tomorrow we have other 3 presentations, same time, 1100 to 1400 Roma time. Remember, so one on migration and the Bible, the other towards a theological reading of migration and then the teaching of the church on migration. So thank you again to all participants for their attention and their listening. I hope that tomorrow we will do a better job in keeping our microphones off. Please. I said it already many times, and tomorrow I guess we will repeat it again. So
When are they ever join that?
again, yeah, in fact, okay. Thank you very much, and see you tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you so
Madam, it's
much.
wonderful.
so much. A good
Thank you
presentation.
very much.